Welcome to Copilot Podcasts. Most football prediction tools give you a number, a percentage, a probability, a confidence score, and then ask you to just trust it. No reasoning, no evidence, no explanation. Just, here's the answer, good luck. What if there was a platform that showed you the thinking? Today, we're getting into the Football Decision Intelligence Platform, a project being built entirely in public. By the end of this episode, you'll understand how this platform actually works under the hood, why the data problem is harder than the AI problem, and what it means to build football intelligence with a community rather than for one. And the person who's going to walk us through all of it knows this project inside and out, so let's get into it. What exactly are we talking about when we say decision intelligence in football?
So decision intelligence is really about combining data, predictive science, machine learning, and AI to help us understand football outcomes better, not just predict them, but actually explain them. The Football Decision Intelligence Platform is a public project that brings all of those things together into one connected system.
And when you say public, you mean like anyone can follow along?
Exactly. The whole thing is being built in public, which is a deliberate choice. The idea is to learn alongside the community, be transparent about what works and what doesn't, and let evidence drive decisions rather than assumptions. The guiding principle is literally build, measure, learn, refine.
I love that. It's almost like the platform itself is following the same philosophy it's trying to apply to football. Test, iterate, improve.
That's exactly it. And what's interesting is that the project started as something much simpler. The original idea was just a Premier League prediction engine. But the more it evolved, the clearer it became that this wasn't really about building another prediction model. It's about exploring how data, analytics, machine learning, generative AI, and football knowledge can work together to help us understand the game better.
So it grew into something bigger than the original idea.
Significantly bigger. And the honest thing about it, which I think is refreshing, is that the project documentation openly says, I don't have everything figured out yet. That's the exciting part. Most tech projects are built behind closed doors and launched polished. This one is inviting people to watch it learn in real time.
Which is either brave or brilliant. Maybe both.
Probably both. But there's a real philosophy behind it. The core principles are learn in public, be transparent, let evidence drive decisions, continuously improve, keep things explainable, and build with the community, not for the community. That last distinction matters a lot.
Yeah, with versus for is a huge difference. One treats the community as participants, the other treats them as an audience.
Exactly. And the community involvement is baked into the design. The project explicitly invites ideas, challenges, alternative approaches, and feedback, and uses that community interaction as part of the learning process itself.
Okay, so let's talk about where it starts, because you mentioned Premier League. Why there specifically?
It's a familiar environment. The Premier League gives the project a well-known, data-rich context to learn, experiment, and validate ideas. It's not the final goal, it's the starting point. The long-term vision is much broader. La Liga, Serie A, Bundesliga, League One, Champions League, Europa League, AFCON, Copa America, Asian Cup, MLS, even friendlies and custom competitions.
That's a massive scope. So the Premier League is basically the proof of concept.
Exactly. And the Week 1 deliverables reflect that. League winner prediction, top 4 forecast, relegation candidates, a surprise team pick, team strength rankings, and methodology notes. It's about establishing a baseline and then improving from there.
Right, because you can't improve what you haven't measured. Okay, so let's get into the actual architecture, because I think this is where it gets really interesting. Walk me through how this thing actually works.
So the architecture flows in a very deliberate sequence. It starts with football data, which feeds into a predictive science layer, then into a modeling framework layer, then into an intelligence layer, then into something called the evidence graph, then into the decision engine, which produces a prediction, which gets an AI explanation, and then the whole thing feeds back into a learning and feedback loop.
Okay, that's a lot of layers. Let's unpack them one by one, because I think each one is doing something distinct.
Yeah, let's do it. So the predictive science layer is where the statistical foundations live. Team strength models, expected goals, which people know as XG, Poisson scoreline modeling, and Monte Carlo simulations. These are the tools that translate raw football data into probabilistic thinking.
And XG is something football fans are increasingly familiar with. It's basically a measure of the quality of a shot, right? How likely it was to go in based on where it was taken from, the angle, that kind of thing.
That's a solid way to put it. And Poisson modeling takes that further. It uses statistical distributions to model how many goals each team is likely to score in a match. Monte Carlo simulations then run thousands of possible match outcomes to give you a probability distribution rather than a single prediction.
So instead of saying Team A wins, you're saying Team A wins in 58% of simulated scenarios. That's a fundamentally different kind of output.
Exactly. And that's what makes it decision intelligence rather than just prediction. You're not getting a single answer, you're getting a range of evidence-backed possibilities. Now, sitting on top of that is the modeling framework, which is where the machine learning lives.
And this is where it gets technical. What's in the modeling framework?
So you've got classical machine learning models, logistic regression, random forests, XGBoost, light GBM, CatBoost, then deep learning models, multi-layer perceptrons, convolutional neural networks, LSTMs, which are great for sequential data like match-by-match form, and other sequence models, then hybrid models that combine statistical and ML approaches, and then more specialized things like player impact models, team-style embeddings, and in the future, graph neural networks.
Wait, team-style embeddings. What does that mean in plain English?
So an embedding is basically a mathematical representation of something complex. A team-style embedding would capture how a team plays, their pressing intensity, their build-up patterns, their defensive shape, and encode that into a format that a model can use. So instead of just knowing that Manchester City scored 80 goals last season, the model also knows something about how they create those goals.
That's actually really cool, because style matchups matter enormously in football. A team that's great against high-pressing sides might struggle against deep block defenses.
Exactly, and that's the kind of nuance that pure results-based models miss, which is why the intelligence layer exists. It's where squad intelligence, lineup intelligence, manager intelligence, and tactical intelligence all come together.
Manager intelligence is interesting to me because managers are notoriously hard to quantify.
They really are, and the platform acknowledges that. Press conferences and public interviews are actually listed as data sources. So the idea is to incorporate what managers say publicly about team selection, injuries, tactical approach, and use that as signal. It's not perfect, but it's better than ignoring it entirely.
That's a really interesting data source. Like, if a manager says in a press conference that a key player is doubtful, that's actually meaningful information.
Absolutely. And it feeds into the evidence graph, which is the central repository where statistics, simulations, model outputs, and agent outputs all become structured evidence. That evidence is then used by the decision engine to produce a prediction.
Okay, so the evidence graph is like the place where all the different signals get organized before a decision is made.
That's a great way to think about it. It's less like a single model making a call and more like a panel of analysts, each submitting a structured report, and then the decision engine synthesizes all of those reports into a prediction. And crucially, the AI explanation layer then explains the reasoning in plain language.
And that's the explainability piece, which the project lists as a core principle. Explainability over complexity.
Right. Because a prediction that nobody understands isn't useful. The goal is for someone who loves football but doesn't know what XGBoost is to still be able to read the output and understand why the platform thinks a particular team is likely to win.
Which brings us to the AI agents, because I think this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Tell me about the agents.
So there are 6 agents: the data agent, the squad agent, the lineup agent, the tactical agent, the manager agent, and the explanation agent. And here's the key thing about how they work. Agents generate evidence rather than directly making predictions. That's a really important distinction.
Why does that distinction matter?
Because it keeps the system honest. If an agent directly made a prediction, you'd have a black box. You'd just get an answer with no trail. But if the agent generates structured evidence, say, the squad agent identifies that a team is missing 3 key players and flags that as a significant factor, then that evidence goes into the evidence graph, and the decision engine uses it transparently. You can trace the reasoning.
So it's auditable. You can see why the system reached the conclusion it did.
Exactly. And the explanation agent is specifically responsible for turning all of that into something a non-technical person can read. The non-technical audience strategy is actually explicit in the project documentation. Lead with football stories, predictions, and insights first, and explain the technology behind the outcomes in simple language after presenting the insights.
That's smart, because if you lead with, we used light GBM and Monte Carlo simulations, you've lost most of your audience before you've said anything interesting.
Ha, exactly. Lead with, here's why we think Arsenal are going to struggle in the next 3 matches, and then explain the methodology. The story first, the science second.
Okay, so let's talk about the data problem, because you mentioned earlier that solving the data problem might actually be harder than building the models. That surprised me.
Yeah, and the project documentation is pretty candid about this. The project lead actually wrote, I have a feeling building the models may end up being the easy part. Because before you can predict anything, you need a reliable data foundation. And getting that foundation right is genuinely hard.
What are the data sources they're working with?
So the strategy is to use free data sources, footballdata.co.uk for results and historical data, FBref for detailed statistics, Understat for XG data, Transfermarkt for squad and transfer information, and then press conferences and public interviews for manager insights. The goal is to combine results, statistics, XG, injuries, squad availability, and manager insights into a unified feature store that feeds the evidence graph.
And a feature store is basically a centralized place where all the processed data lives, ready to be used by the models.
Right. And the challenge is that these sources don't always agree. They have different formats, different update frequencies, different levels of completeness. Data quality and governance is a whole section of the project handbook. Because garbage in, garbage out, if your data is bad, your predictions will be bad, regardless of how sophisticated your models are.
There's something almost humbling about that. You can have the most advanced AI in the world, and it's still only as good as the data you feed it.
That's the reality of any data science project. And it's why the project is being transparent about it rather than pretending it's a solved problem. The data strategy is evolving. There are future sources listed in the backlog, including weather data, referee data, betting markets, transfer impacts, and even real-time predictions eventually.
Weather data for football predictions. I hadn't thought about that, but it makes sense. A heavy pitch affects certain styles of play more than others.
Exactly. And referee data is interesting too. Different referees have different tendencies around cards, penalties, how they manage physical play. That's signal that most prediction models completely ignore.
Okay, so let's talk about the roadmap, because the project has a very structured version-by-version approach. Walk me through it.
So it starts at version 0.1 with preseason predictions, just getting something out there, establishing a baseline. Version 0.2 is data ingestion, building the data pipeline. Version 0.3 is team strength models. Version 0.4 is XG and simulations. Version 0.5 is machine learning. And then version 1 is the full decision intelligence platform.
So it's genuinely incremental. Each version adds a layer of sophistication.
And each version is measurable. You can compare the predictions from version 0.1 to version 0.3 and see whether adding team strength models actually improved accuracy. That's the build, measure, learn, refine principle in action.
And the success criteria are defined too. Improve predictions over time, maintain transparency, educate the community, and build a reusable football intelligence framework. That last one is interesting. Reusable.
Yeah, because the goal isn't just to predict Premier League matches. The goal is to build a framework that can be applied to any competition. That's why the multi-competition vision is so central. The architecture is designed to be extensible from the start.
And the community piece, the newsletter, is called Data, Decisions, and Predictions. So there's a content layer on top of the technical layer.
Right. The newsletter is how the project communicates with the community, sharing updates, explaining methodology, presenting predictions, inviting feedback. And the build in public strategy means that the community can see the thinking, challenge it, and contribute to it. It's not just a product launch, it's an ongoing conversation.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about the project being built alongside a full-time job, because I think that's actually an important part of the story.
It is. The project documentation is honest about it. Progress may not always be lightning fast. Some weeks things move quickly. Some weeks life gets in the way. And the ask to the community is not for sponsorship or investment, it's for encouragement. A comment, a question, a challenge, a suggestion. That's the currency that keeps the momentum going.
There's something really genuine about that. It's not a startup pitch. It's not a product launch. It's someone saying, I'm going to try to build something interesting. I'm going to do it in the open, and I'd love your company on the journey.
And that's actually a really powerful model for learning. Because when you commit to building in public, you're accountable. You can't quietly abandon something or pretend a failed experiment didn't happen. The community saw it. That accountability is a feature, not a bug.
It's like open source software, but for football thinking. The community becomes a kind of distributed quality control.
That's a great analogy. And the contributor pathways are explicitly part of the project structure. There are ways for people to get involved, whether they're technical or not. You don't need to be a developer. If you're curious, willing to learn, and enjoy football, you're welcome.
Which is a pretty inclusive vision for what is, at its core, a pretty technical project.
And I think that's intentional, because the non-technical audience strategy is explicit. Lead with football stories and predictions, explain the technology in simple language after presenting the insights. The platform is designed to be useful to someone who just wants to know who's going to win the title, not just to data scientists.
So when you step back from everything we've covered, the architecture, the agents, the data strategy, the community model, what does this really come down to?
It comes down to a fundamental shift in how we think about football prediction. Most tools give you an answer. This platform gives you a reasoning process. The evidence graph, the AI agents, the explanation layer, they're all in service of one idea, that a prediction you can understand and interrogate is more valuable than a prediction you just have to trust.
And the build-in-public approach means that the reasoning process itself is visible. You can see how the platform is learning, where it's getting things wrong, and how it's improving.
Exactly. And that's what makes it genuinely different. It's not just a prediction engine, it's a learning system. The learning and feedback loop at the end of the architecture feeds back into the beginning. Every prediction that gets made, every outcome that gets observed, makes the next prediction better.
And the community is part of that loop too. Their challenges, their alternative approaches, their feedback, that's all signal.
Right. The goal, as the project puts it, is not to build this alone. The goal is to learn together and create something better than any of us could build individually. That's a genuinely ambitious idea.
Here's what I keep coming back to, though. We started this conversation talking about how most prediction tools give you a number and ask you to trust it. And what this platform is trying to do is the opposite. Show the work, explain the reasoning, make the intelligence transparent. That's a harder thing to build, but it's a much more honest thing to build.
And it's a more useful thing to build. Because if you understand why a prediction was made, you can evaluate it, you can agree with it, challenge it, improve on it. A black box prediction doesn't give you that. It just gives you a number to either believe or ignore.
So the next time you see a football prediction and it's just a percentage with no explanation, ask yourself what's behind it. Because the interesting question isn't who's going to win, it's why do we think that, and what would change our mind. That's what decision intelligence is actually for. Thanks for joining us on Copilot Podcasts. And if this project sounds like something you want to follow, the newsletter is called Data, Decisions and Predictions. Go find it, get involved, and maybe be part of building something genuinely new.